She was a waitress, drowning in debt and insignificance, and her only goal for the night was to remain invisible. But one clumsy mistake, a single tray of spilled wine at the most exclusive gala of the year, sent her crashing into the world of its host, the ancient and terrifyingly powerful vampire king, Cashin. Snow, after a shocking supernatural reaction to a drop of her blood, he tells her she can never leave, for she is the anchor to his dying life and the unwilling epicenter of a looming civil war. The crystal flute in her hand trembled, a fragile cage for the fizzing gold liquid within. Don't drop it. Alara's mantra for the night was a simple, desperate loop. Don't trip. Don't spill. Don't make eye contact. Most importantly, don't get fired. This job, serving champagne to people whose shoes cost more than her apartment, was the only thing standing between her and an eviction notice. The ballroom of the Empyrean Tower was a galaxy of stolen stars. Light from a dozen chandeliers splintered across diamond necklaces and glittered in eyes that held a predatory stillness. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and something else, something metallic and ancient, like ozone before a storm. It was the scent of power, and it made the hairs on her arms stand on end. She moved through the glittering throng like a ghost, a gray shadow in a black uniform, her tray held aloft like a shield. The faces were a blur of aristocratic boredom and razor-sharp smiles. These were the city's elite, the 1% of the 1%, people who moved the world with a whispered word or a signed check. And tonight, they had all gathered to pay tribute to their king. He sat on a raised dais at the far end of the hall, not on a throne, but in a simple, high-backed chair that looked like it had been carved from petrified night. King Cashin. His name was a legend whispered in the darkest corners of the city's lore, a creature of impossible age and unimaginable wealth. He was the CEO of Nightfall Enterprises, the silent owner of half the city, but everyone who mattered knew what he truly was. Alara had seen his picture in magazines. A face of harsh, beautiful angles and eyes that seemed to absorb all light and reflect none. In person, he was a masterpiece of stillness. He watched the proceedings with a profound, soul-deep boredom, his posture relaxed but radiating a coiled tension that promised swift, absolute violence. He hadn't moved in an hour, yet he was the center of gravity in the room. Every glance, every laugh, every hushed conversation orbited him. Her boss, a pinched-faced woman named Marie, had been very clear. You serve the guests on the floor. You do not approach the dais. You do not look at the king. You do not speak unless spoken to, and you pray to God no one speaks to you. Are we clear? Perfectly. Getting close to a man like that was like getting close to a black hole. She refilled a glass for a woman whose laughter sounded like shattering ice. She offered hors d'oeuvres to a man with the eyes of a wolf. The smile on her face felt brittle, a porcelain mask she was terrified would crack. The rent was due Friday. Her brother's tuition payment was already late. The pressure was a physical weight on her shoulders. Just a few more hours. Alara? The voice cut through the curated hum of the party, a familiar, unwelcome sound that made her stomach clench. She turned, her heart sinking like a stone. Jamie. Her ex-boyfriend stood there, looking painfully out of place in his rumpled jacket. He'd somehow sweet-talked his way past the formidable security. His eyes, once charming, now just looked desperate. "What are you doing here?" she hissed, keeping her voice low, her eyes darting around for Marie. "I need to talk to you," he said, grabbing her arm. "It's important. I just need a little help. 200. That's all. I can pay you back next week. I swear." The same old story. The same old lie. The shame and anger burned in her throat. "Jamie, I can't. I'm working. You need to leave. Please," he begged, his grip tightening. "They're going to break my legs." A guest nearby turned to stare, a woman in a crimson dress with a look of pure contempt. Alara felt a hot flush of embarrassment creep up her neck. She tried to pull her arm away. "Let go of me, Jamie. Just listen to me for 1 second. He yanked her arm harder this time. Her balance, already precarious in the cheap, ill-fitting heels, was gone. She stumbled backward, a small, choked cry escaping her lips. The world tilted into slow motion. The tray she was carrying, laden with glasses of deep, blood-red wine, left her hands. It seemed to hang in the air for an eternity, a constellation of shimmering glass and ruby liquid. Then, gravity reasserted itself with brutal finality. It crashed directly into the chest of a man who had been standing just behind her. A collective, horrified gasp swept through the ballroom. The music faltered and died. Every head turned. Alara's eyes followed the path of the disaster. The dark, expensive suit now stained a dripping, visceral red, the shattered glass tinkling as it hit the polished marble floor. And the face of the man she had collided with. It was King Cashin. He had risen from his chair at some point, moving with the silence that was his signature, and she had stumbled right into him. Everything stopped. The air crackled with a sudden, terrible silence. He didn't look angry. He didn't look at all. He simply looked down at the crimson stain spreading across his white shirt like a fresh wound. "I am so sorry," Alara stammered, her voice a pathetic squeak. Mortification was a fire consuming her from the inside out. She was fired. She was probably blacklisted from every service job in the city. She dropped to her knees, ignoring the stares, ignoring Jamie who had already vanished back into the crowd like the coward he was. Her only instinct was to fix it, to undo the impossible. She reached for a large shard of broken glass, her hands shaking uncontrollably. "Don't," a voice commanded, low and resonant as a cello string. But it was too late. The edge of the glass was sharper than she expected. It sliced across her palm, a line of searing pain. She flinched, pulling her hand back with a gasp. A single, perfect drop of her blood welled up from the cut. It was dark and vibrant against her pale skin. It trembled for a moment on the tip of her finger before falling. A tiny scarlet meteor, onto the marble floor right beside the toe of his immaculate leather shoe. The moment it touched the stone, something happened. A soft, ethereal light pulsed from the drop of blood, a faint crimson glow that seemed to defy all laws of nature. It shimmered like a dying ember, and a strange warmth spread through the air. Cashin, who had been looking at his ruined shirt with disinterest, went rigid. His head snapped down, his gaze locking onto the glowing bead of blood on the floor. His eyes, a moment ago, they had been obsidian black, cold and empty as a winter night. Now, they blazed with an inner fire, a molten gold that was terrifying and beautiful. It wasn't a trick of the light. It was a fundamental change, as if a star had just been born in the void of his pupils. A tremor ran through him, a barely perceptible shudder that seemed to shake the very foundations of his immense control. He looked from the blood to her, and for the first time he truly saw her. His gaze wasn't one of anger or annoyance. It was one of profound, world-shattering shock, of disbelief, of awe. Across the ballroom, every one of the predatory, still-eyed guests had frozen. Their masks of bored civility had fallen away, replaced by raw, naked hunger. Their eyes, all of them, were fixed on her, glowing with a faint, reflected light. They looked at her not as a clumsy waitress, but as a prize, as a feast. The man with the wolf-like eyes took a step forward, his lips curling back from his teeth in a nascent snarl. Before he could take a second step, Cashin moved. He wasn't fast. He was instantaneous. One moment he was by the dais, the next he was standing in front of Alara, shielding her from the room. The air displaced by his movement was a cold slap against her face. He raised a hand, not looking at the advancing man, his golden eyes still locked on her. "Do not," he said. The words were quiet, yet they filled the vast hall, vibrating in the bones of every person present. "Touch what is mine." The wolfman froze, his body rigid with a primal fear that overrode his hunger. Cashin knelt, moving with a fluid grace that seemed impossible for his large frame. He ignored the cut on her hand, his attention fixed on her face. His expression was a storm of emotions she couldn't begin to decipher. "What is your name?" he asked, his voice softer now, but no less commanding. "Ilara," she whispered, her throat dry with terror. He reached out, his long, cool fingers gently tilting her chin up. The touch was electric, sending a shiver through her entire body. His golden eyes searched hers, looking for something, an answer to a question he hadn't asked. "Ilara," he repeated, the name a strange caress on his tongue. He looked at the room of hungry predators, then back at her. A decision settled in his gaze, hard and absolute as diamond. "Your life as you knew it," he said, his voice flat and devoid of pity, "is over." The world dissolved into a blur of motion. Strong arms lifted her from the floor as if she weighed nothing. The glittering ballroom, the horrified faces, the shattered glass. It all smeared into a kaleidoscope of light and shadow. She felt a disorienting sensation, a lurch in her stomach like the world's fastest elevator, and then the biting cold of the night air. She was bundled into the back of a black car with windows as dark as obsidian. The door clicked shut with the finality of a vault. Beside her, Cashin sat in perfect silence, his profile carved from stone against the flashing city lights. The golden glow in his eyes had subsided, leaving them dark and unreadable once more. Panic, cold and sharp, finally pierced the fog of shock. "Where are you taking me? I haven't done anything. It was an accident." He didn't look at her. He simply stared forward as the car sped through the night, a silent phantom on the empty streets. "The accident was not you spilling the wine," he said, his voice a low rumble. "The accident was you bleeding." She looked down at her hand. The cut had already stopped bleeding, leaving a thin red line that tingled with a strange warmth. They arrived at a skyscraper that pierced the clouds, a needle of black glass and steel that she recognized as the headquarters of Nightfall Enterprises. The car descended into a private underground garage, and she was led to a silent elevator. There were no buttons. Cashin simply placed his hand on a glass panel, and the elevator began its ascent, impossibly fast and smooth. The doors opened directly into a penthouse that was larger than her entire apartment building. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a panoramic view of the city, a carpet of glittering lights laid out below them like a conquered kingdom. The furniture was sparse, modern, and brutally expensive. It was less a home and more a monument to power and isolation. "You can't just kidnap me," she said, her voice shaking but laced with a thread of defiance. "I can," he replied, turning to face her. The sheer force of his presence was overwhelming in the enclosed space. "And I am not keeping you prisoner, Ilara. I am keeping you safe." "Safe from what? From a lawsuit? I don't have any money. I can't pay for your suit." "Safe from them," he interrupted, gesturing vaguely toward the city below. "Every vampire in that ballroom tonight felt what I felt. They smelled your blood, and they saw what it did. They saw the sanguis anima." "The what?" The words meant nothing to her. It sounded like a brand of coffee. "The blood of the soul," a new voice said. A man emerged from the shadows of the apartment. He was older, with silver hair and kind, weary eyes. He wore a simple, well-tailored suit and held a medical kit in his hands. He approached her with a gentle smile, a stark contrast to Cashin's intimidating stillness. "My name is Julius," he said. "I am His Majesty's advisor. May I see your hand?" Numbly, she held it out. He took it carefully, his touch surprisingly warm. He cleaned the small cut and applied a bandage with practiced ease. "For centuries," Julius began, his voice calm and academic, "our kind has been suffering from a malady we call the Fade, a slow decay of our vitality, our strength. It is a curse woven into our very existence, and it is accelerating. We believe that within a few generations, it will render us extinct." Ilara stared at him, trying to process the words. Vampires, curse, extinction. It was the plot of a bad supernatural thriller, not her life. "We have searched for a cure for millennia," Julius continued, his eyes grave. "Ancient texts spoke of a prophecy, a human bloodline that carried the key. A bloodline that could anchor a vampire, halting the fade and restoring what was lost. They called it the sanguis anima. He glanced at Cashin, who stood by the window, a dark silhouette against the glittering city. We believed it was a myth, a fairy tale to give a dying race hope. Until tonight. Alara's gaze followed his. She looked at the king, then down at her bandaged hand. Me? My blood? That's impossible. My family is from Ohio. We're nobody. Blood does not care for geography or status, Cashin said without turning around. It remembers. Yours has remembered a very old and very dangerous promise. When your blood was exposed, it resonated with my own, the royal line. It created a bond. A bond? She whispered. You are now my anchor, he stated, the words carrying an impossible weight. Your life force is tied to mine. As long as you are alive, and near me, the fade in me is halted. Reversed, even he finally turned, and the cold reality in his eyes was like a physical blow. This makes you the most valuable commodity in our world, and the most vulnerable target. Her breath hitched. The hungry looks in the ballroom suddenly made a terrifying kind of sense. They hadn't wanted to punish her. They had wanted to consume her, to own the cure for themselves. Every vampire who was there tonight will be hunting you, Cashin said. My rivals, my enemies, they will want to take you from me, to control you, to bleed you dry and steal the gift your blood provides. They will not stop. They will not show mercy. He walked toward her, his steps silent on the marble floor. He stopped just before her, forcing her to tilt her head back to look up at him. That is why you are here, he said, his voice dropping to a low, possessive growl. This is your sanctuary, and your cage. You will not leave. You will not contact your old life. You will be safe here under my protection. Because you, Alara, now belong to me. The words echoed in the sterile silence of the penthouse. Belong to me. It wasn't a comfort. It was a sentence. She had started the night worried about rent. Now she was the property of a vampire king, the unwilling cure to a supernatural plague, and a prisoner in a gilded cage in the sky. Terror was a cold, sharp thing in her chest. But beneath it, a tiny, stubborn ember of defiance began to glow. He may have saved her life, but he had also stolen it. And she would not let him own her soul. The days that followed blurred into a monotonous cycle of luxurious confinement. Alara had everything she could possibly want, and nothing she truly needed. She had a bedroom the size of her old apartment, with silk sheets and a closet filled with clothes from designers she'd only ever seen in magazines. Meals appeared on silver trays, prepared by a staff she never saw. Books, movies, music, all were available at the touch of a button. But the doors were locked. The windows were made of unbreakable, reinforced glass. Guards, silent and imposing as statues, were posted in the hallway outside her suite. They were polite, but their eyes were cold and watchful. They were not her protectors. They were her jailers. Cashin was a phantom. He would be gone for long stretches, conducting the business of his vast empire, both mortal and immortal. Then he would appear without warning, a sudden, suffocating presence in the room. He would watch her, his dark eyes intense and unreadable, as if she were a complex puzzle he was trying to solve. He rarely spoke. When he did, it was to issue instructions or to ask curt, impersonal questions about her health. He never asked about her feelings, about the life she had lost. To him, she was a possession, a precious, vital asset that needed to be guarded. Her only regular human or humanoid contact was Julius. The kind-eyed advisor would visit her daily, bringing her books on their history and trying to gently explain the intricate, brutal politics of the vampire world. The council is not pleased, he told her one afternoon, as she listlessly pushed food around her plate. The council? She asked, the word tasting foreign. The Vampire Council, a body of the oldest and most powerful lords. They govern our laws, our traditions. They see your arrival as a complication. I'm a complication? A bitter laugh escaped her. I'm a prisoner. Julius's expression was sympathetic. To them, a human holding such sway over the king is a threat to the established order. A disruption. They have demanded an audience. An audience with me? With the king. But you are to be presented. Presented. Like a show dog. Or a piece of art. The humiliation stung. The day of the council meeting, she was dressed in a simple but elegant dark blue dress that had been laid out for her. It was designed to make her look respectable but unassuming. A lamb being led to slaughter, dressed in finery. Cashin came for her himself. He wore a severe, black suit that seemed to amplify his aura of absolute authority. He looked at her, his eyes sweeping over her from head to toe in a clinical assessment. "They will try to intimidate you," he said, his voice devoid of warmth. "They will insult you. Do not react. Do not speak unless I permit it. Look only at me. Understand?" She nodded, her throat too tight to form words. He led her through a series of cold, stone corridors deep beneath the tower, to a chamber that felt ancient and suffocating. The air was heavy and still. A massive, circular table of polished obsidian dominated the room, surrounded by 12 high-backed chairs. All but one were occupied. The vampires seated at the table were nothing like the glamorous guests at the gala. These were the true elders. Their faces were masks of ancient power and predatory cunning. Their eyes, holding the weight of centuries, fixed on her the moment she entered, stripping her bare with their cold, analytical gazes. Cashin took his seat at the head of the table, the empty chair beside him a stark symbol of his singular authority. Alara was made to stand behind him, slightly to his right like a secretary or a pet. A vampire with a cruel, hawkish face and hair the color of old silver leaned forward. His name, she knew from Julius's lessons, was Lord Valerius. He was Cashin's most vocal and dangerous political rival. "So this is it," Valerius said, his voice a dry rustle of dead leaves. He did not look at Cashin, but kept his eyes locked on Alara. "The great cure, the miracle worker. She looks frail," the word was an insult, a dismissal. "She is more valuable than every soul at this table combined," Cashin stated, his voice flat and cold. "And she is under my protection." A woman with fiery red hair and a venomously beautiful face laughed. A sharp, unpleasant sound. Serafina. Julius had warned Alara about her. A high-ranking duchess from an ancient bloodline, she had been Cashin's intended consort for a century. A political alliance meant to unify the oldest houses. "Protection," Serafina purred. Her eyes, the color of emeralds, filled with undisguised contempt as she raked them over Alara. "Or is she your new pet, Cashin? Has the great king become so weakened by the fade that he must now chain a mortal to his side for comfort?" The insult was directed at him, but the poison was meant for Alara. She felt herself flinch, her hands clenching into fists at her sides. She remembered Cashin's command. "Don't react." She forced her hands to relax, her gaze fixed on the back of his head. "Her presence here is a mockery of our laws," Valerius declared, his voice rising with theatrical indignation. "For centuries, we have kept our existence a secret from the human world. Now, you bring one of them into our most sacred chambers. A human of no lineage, no standing. A gutter creature who stumbled into a power she cannot possibly comprehend. Her lineage is older and more potent than yours, Valerius," Cashin countered, his tone dangerously soft. "A fact your jealousy cannot erase. Her lineage makes her a weapon." Valerius slammed his fist on the obsidian table, the sound cracking through the silence. "A weapon that any of our enemies could turn against us. What is to stop them from capturing her? What is to stop them from using her blood to create their own anchors to build their own armies? You have not secured an asset. You have created a catastrophic liability. I will not allow her to be taken." "You are one man," a different lord snarled. "You cannot be everywhere at once. This human makes you vulnerable. Your sentimentality is a weakness that will doom us all." "Sentimentality?" Alara almost choked. Cashin treated her with all the sentimentality of a bank vault. "What would you have me do?" Cassian asked, his voice a low challenge. Valerius smiled, a thin, predatory curving of his lips. He had been waiting for this. The old laws are clear. An asset of such power must be secured. Utterly. There is the ritual of servitude. It would bind her will to yours, making her a mindless, obedient vessel. Her power would be yours to command, but her dangerous human free will would be extinguished. Alara's blood ran cold. Mindless, obedient. The words were a death sentence. Her eyes widened in horror, and she couldn't stop the small gasp that escaped her lips. Seraphina's smile was triumphant. An elegant solution. She would be a proper tool, not a distraction. Alara's gaze darted to Cassian, her heart pounding against her ribs in a frantic rhythm. She saw the rigid line of his shoulders, the tightening of the muscles in his jaw. He was considering it. He had to be. It was the logical, ruthless choice. The king's choice. He had already told her she belonged to him. This would simply make it official. He'll kill Jamie anyway. The thought was a sudden, chilling premonition. No, not kill him. Erase him. A long, tense silence stretched, thick with anticipation. The council members watched him, their eyes gleaming. They had backed him into a corner. Cassian slowly turned his head, his dark eyes meeting Alara's. For a fleeting second, she saw something in their depths beyond cold authority. A flicker of conflict, a shadow of something else. Then he turned back to the council. No, he said. The word was quiet, but it landed with the force of a thunderclap. Valerius's smile faltered. What? I will not break her, Cassian said, his voice ringing with an absolute finality that tolerated no argument. She is not a tool. She is not a vessel. She is my anchor. Her will is her own. She will remain under my protection, as she is. A murmur of outrage rippled around the table. This is unacceptable, Valerius roared, rising to his feet. You defy the council. You defy tradition. You place the life of a single human above the security of our entire race. I place the future of our race in her survival, Cassian corrected, his voice lethally calm. He rose to his feet as well, and his full, terrifying stature seemed to diminish everyone else in the room. And I am her shield. This discussion is over. If any of you wish to challenge my decision, you may do so through the ancient rite of combat. I will be waiting. He looked around the table, his eyes issuing a silent, deadly promise. One by one, the council members looked away, their outrage tempered by the stark reality of his power. None of them, not even Valerius, was foolish enough to face the king in single combat. You are a fool, Cassian, Valerius spat, his face a mask of fury. Your heart will be your undoing, and it will drag us all down with you. Cassian ignored him. He turned to Alara, his expression unreadable. We are leaving. He walked out of the chamber without a backward glance, and Alara had no choice but to hurry after him, the contemptuous glares of the council burning into her back like physical brands. He had defended her. He had defied his own people for her. He had refused to destroy her mind, to turn her into a slave. A part of her felt a dizzying surge of relief, of something that felt dangerously like gratitude. But another, colder part of her knew the truth. He hadn't saved her out of kindness. He had simply chosen one cage over another. And by openly defying his counsel, he had not only deepened the fractures in his own power base, he had painted an even larger target on her back. The days after the council meeting were thick with a new kind of tension. The silence in the penthouse was heavier, the unseen threat more palpable. Alara felt like the calm center of a gathering storm. She knew Valerius and his faction would not accept Cassian's decree. They were maneuvering in the shadows, and she was the pawn they intended to capture. Cassian was gone more often now, caught in the political fallout of his decision. He was shoring up allegiances, putting down whispers of rebellion. When he was in the penthouse, he was more distant than ever, a storm cloud of silent fury and preoccupation. The brief flicker of connection she thought she'd seen in the council chamber was gone. replaced by the familiar cold mask of the king. Loneliness was a constant ache in her chest. She missed the simple things. The smell of rain on pavement, the mindless chatter of a coffee shop, the freedom to just walk outside and feel the sun on her face. She was a ghost haunting a life of impossible luxury, and her past felt like a dream she was beginning to forget. Except for Jamie. Thoughts of him were a complicated knot of anger, pity, and a lingering, foolish sense of responsibility. He was a mess, a weak man who made terrible choices, but he was also her last tangible link to the world she had lost. He was a piece of her past, and in her gilded cage, the past was all she had. One evening, a small, folded piece of paper appeared on the silver tray that held her dinner. It was not from the kitchen staff. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she picked it up. Her name was written on the outside in a familiar, messy scrawl. Jamie. Her hands trembled as she unfolded it. Alara, I'm so sorry. I was a coward. I saw them take you. I know you're in trouble. I found someone who can help. Someone who works for him but doesn't agree with what's happening. They can get you out. If you want to be free, meet me. Parking garage, level 4, corner of 6th and Elm. Midnight tomorrow. I won't leave you behind. Promise. G. She read the note 3 times, her mind racing. It was insane. It was a trap. Cashin had eyes everywhere. There was no way to get out. But what if there was? What if some guard, some servant, had a conscience? What if Jamie, for once in his pathetic life, was actually trying to do the right thing? The hope was a small, fragile thing, but it took root in the barren ground of her despair. Freedom. The word was a song in her head. To walk away from the vampire politics, the threats, the suffocating protection of a king who saw her as an object. She wrestled with the decision all night and all the next day. Her rational mind screamed that it was a trap. Valerius would use any means necessary to get to her, and her weak, debt-ridden ex-boyfriend was the perfect tool. But her heart, starved for a connection, for a chance at a normal life, whispered a different story. What if this was her only chance? If she stayed, her future was a life sentence of imprisonment, waiting for the next assassination attempt. If she tried to escape and failed, her situation couldn't possibly get any worse. That night, she waited until the tower fell into its deepest silence. The note had contained a second, smaller piece of paper, a keycard, a risk taken by her supposed ally on the inside. Clutching it, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs, she slipped out of her room. The hallway was empty. The usual guards were gone. A chill of unease went down her spine. Was this proof of help or proof of a trap? Too late to turn back now. She found a service elevator, her keycard granting her access. The ride down was agonizingly slow. Every floor they passed was a new opportunity for discovery. But no alarm sounded. The doors opened into the sterile silence of the underground parking garage. She moved through the forest of concrete pillars, the air cold and smelling of gasoline and damp stone. The silence was unnerving. She reached the designated corner of level 4. It was empty. The dim fluorescent lights cast long, distorted shadows. Jamie? She called out, her voice a small, trembling thing in the vast space. Over here. He stepped out from behind a large concrete support pillar. He looked terrible. His face was pale and slick with sweat, his eyes wide with fear. Are you okay? She asked, rushing toward him. What's going on? We have to go, he said, his voice strained. He wouldn't meet her eyes. They're coming. Who's coming? The person who's helping us. A slow, cruel chuckle echoed from the shadows. In a manner of speaking, Lord Valerius emerged from the darkness, followed by 2 other vampires whose faces were cold and predatory. He was dressed impeccably, but his smile was pure venom. He looked at Alara with an expression of triumph. Such a predictable creature, Valerius said, his gaze flicking to Jamie with utter contempt. So easily manipulated by a sliver of false hope. Your pet served his purpose well. The blood drained from Alara's face. She turned to Jamie, the betrayal a physical blow, so sharp and stunning it stole her breath. "You," she whispered. "You did this." Jamie flinched, finally looking at her. His eyes were filled with a wretched mix of guilt and terror. "They promised me money, enough to get out of the city to start over. They said they wouldn't hurt you. They just wanted to talk to you, to get you away from him." "You fool," Valerius sneered. "You believed us?" He made a dismissive gesture. "You have outlived your usefulness." Before Jamie could even react, one of Valerius's thugs moved with blinding speed. There was a sickening crunch of bone, and Jamie crumpled to the ground, a broken puppet whose strings had been cut. He was gone before he even hit the pavement. Alara screamed, a raw, ragged sound of horror and grief. "A loose end, tidily snipped," Valerius said calmly, stepping over Jamie's body as if it were a piece of trash. "Now, Mistress Alara, you will come with us. We are going to offer you a much more secure form of protection than the king's fleeting sentiment." She backed away, her body trembling uncontrollably. There was nowhere to run. The two vampires fanned out, cutting off any escape. "You won't get away with this," she said, the words a pathetic bluff. "He'll find you." "Oh, I have no doubt," Valerius said with a chilling smile. "In fact, I'm counting on it. When he finds your body, drained and discarded, his focus will shatter. His grief will make him weak, reckless. And my allies on the council and I will be there to pick up the pieces of his broken kingdom." He planned to kill her, right here. He would break Cashin by breaking his most prized possession. One of the vampires lunged. Alara squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the impact, for the pain. It never came. There was a sound like a thunderclap ripping through the garage. A blur of motion. The vampire who had been lunging at her was suddenly gone, replaced by a dark, furious shape. Cashin. His eyes were not gold, not black. They were burning infernos of pure, undiluted rage. He held the vampire by the throat, lifting him effortlessly off the ground. There was a sharp crack, and the vampire went limp. Cashin tossed the body aside like a discarded toy. It hit a concrete pillar with a wet, final thud. Valerius's smug expression had vanished, replaced by a mask of shock and fear. "Impossible. My sources said you were off-world." "Your sources are dead," Cashin snarled, his voice a low, guttural sound that was barely human. He turned his burning gaze on the second vampire. The creature was paralyzed with terror. It didn't even have time to beg for mercy before Cashin was upon him. A whirlwind of silent, brutal violence. It was over in a second. Now only Valerius was left. He stood, frozen, between Cashin and Alara. Cashin took a slow step forward, the sound of his shoes on the concrete echoing like a death knell. He didn't even look at Alara. His entire being, his entire terrifying focus, was locked on the rival who had dared to touch what was his. "You have made a grave error, Valerius," he whispered, the sound carrying a promise of unimaginable pain. "She is a weakness," Valerius shrieked, finding his voice. "A human flaw in your armor. I did this for the good of our people." "There is no our people anymore," Cashin said. "There is only you, and the consequences of your ambition." He moved. It was not a fight. It was an execution. Valerius tried to defend himself, but he was like a child fighting a hurricane. Cashin's movements were precise, economical, and devastatingly final. The sounds were sickening, a symphony of breaking bones and torn flesh. Alara stood, shaking, unable to look away. This was the king in his purest form. Not the bored CEO, not the reluctant protector. This was the ancient predator, the warrior who had carved an empire out of blood and fear. When it was over, Valerius was a broken heap on the filthy floor. Cashin stood over him, his breathing even, not a single drop of blood on his pristine suit. He looked at the carnage he had wrought with cold, dispassionate eyes. Then he turned to her. The rage in his eyes was gone, replaced by something far worse. Cold, profound disappointment. a fury that was contained, frozen into ice. It was more terrifying than the fire. He walked toward her, his steps measured. She flinched as he approached, her mind screaming with the images of what he had just done. He stopped in front of her, his shadow falling over her like a shroud. He looked down at Jamie's body, then back at her. "You chose this," he said, his voice flat, each word a shard of ice. "You chose to trust him, a weak, pathetic traitor, over me. I wanted to be free," she whispered, tears finally breaking free and streaming down her face. "You were safe," he countered, his voice rising, the ice cracking to reveal the fire beneath. "I defied my counsel for you. I made enemies of the most powerful beings in my world for you. I gave you a sanctuary, and you threw it away for the empty promises of a worm. The injustice of it, the sheer unfairness, broke through her fear. A sanctuary? You call this a sanctuary? It's a prison. You locked me up and treated me like a thing, a possession. You never once asked me what I wanted. What you want is irrelevant," he thundered, the force of his voice making her stagger back a step. "Your survival is all that matters. Do you see now? Do you finally understand the world you are in? This is the consequence of your freedom, Elara. Death. This is what they will do to you the moment you are out of my sight." He gestured to the bodies littering the floor. "This is the mercy they will show you." He stepped closer, his cold fury a palpable force. "You have proven that you cannot be trusted. You have proven that you do not understand the dangers. From now on, things will be different." He reached out, his fingers closing around her upper arm in a grip that was not brutal, but was as unyielding as steel. "There will be no more chances, no more trust. You will not leave my sight. You wanted my attention? You have it." He pulled her away from the carnage, back toward the waiting elevator. Her cage was no longer just a penthouse. It was now the shadow of the king himself. And as she looked back at Jamie's still form, she knew that in her desperate bid for freedom, she had only succeeded in locking the final, heaviest bolt on her own prison door. In the wake of the bloody ambush, the atmosphere in the castle, for that is what the tower truly was, grew heavier, more oppressive. Cashin was true to his word. Elara was never left alone. If he was in the tower, she was in the same room with him. She ate when he ate, sat in silence in his office as he conducted his business, and tried to read in the corner of his private library while he brooded. Her world had shrunk to the size of his shadow. The guards outside her door were doubled. Julius's friendly visits ceased, replaced by a strained formality when he entered the king's presence to deliver reports. She was more isolated than ever, a ghost tied to a storm. Cashin's fury had cooled into a glacier of cold, watchful silence. He rarely spoke to her, and when he did, his voice was clipped and impersonal. Yet, she felt his eyes on her constantly. It wasn't a gaze of affection or concern. It was the vigilant, proprietary gaze of a man guarding his most valuable and most frustratingly volatile asset. A grand ceremony was approaching. The blood tithe. Julius had explained it to her once, in the days when they were still allowed to speak freely. It was an ancient, formal gathering where the vassal lords of Cashin's kingdom came to the capital to renew their oaths of fealty, a public display of unity and power. "He can't possibly expect me to go," Elara said to her own reflection in the mirror one morning. But of course he did. He had said she would not leave his sight. On the night of the tithe, a gown was laid out for her. It was breathtaking, a column of deep crimson silk that shimmered like liquid fire. It was a queen's dress. Wearing it felt like a lie, a costume for a role she had never auditioned for. It also felt like a statement. Cashin was not hiding her. He was flaunting her, daring anyone to challenge his claim. He came to escort her himself, dressed in formal black attire that was stark and militaristic. When he saw her in the crimson gown, his cold expression flickered. For a barest fraction of a second, something shifted in his eyes, a spark of heat, of appreciation, before the mask of indifference slammed back into place. "Stay close to me," he commanded, offering his arm. His touch was formal, impersonal, but the warmth of his skin through the fabric of his suit was a startling shock. The grand hall was even more opulent than the ballroom where they had first met. It was filled with hundreds of vampires, the powerful and the ancient from every corner of his domain. The air was electric with tension. As they entered, a wave of silence followed them. Every eye turned to her, the human in the blood-red dress standing beside the king. The looks were a mixture of awe, curiosity, hatred, and hunger. She could feel Serafina's glare from across the room, a palpable heat of pure venom. The Duchess stood with a cadre of lords who had been loyal to Valerius, their faces grim and hostile. They were a knot of rebellion in the heart of the court. The ceremony began. One by one, the lords approached the dais where Cassian sat, Elara standing at his side. They knelt, recited the ancient oath, and offered a ceremonial drop of their own blood into a shared chalice, a symbol of their mingled loyalties. It was halfway through the proceedings when the attack came. It was not a frontal assault. It was subtle, deceptive. Serafina approached the dais, not when it was her turn, but as if to speak to one of the king's guards. She moved with a dancer's grace, her emerald green gown a slash of color in the somber hall. Elara watched her, a knot of dread tightening in her stomach. Something was wrong. Serafina stumbled, a theatrical, calculated misstep that sent her lurching sideways, directly toward Elara. "My apologies," she purred, her voice dripping with false concern as she reached out a hand to steady herself, placing it on Elara's arm. A searing, white-hot pain exploded in Elara's side. It was so intense, so sudden, it stole the air from her lungs. She looked down. She saw nothing. No naif, no weapon. But Serafina's smile was triumphant, her eyes blazing with murderous glee. She pulled her hand back, and in her palm was a tiny, intricate silver pin, its tip now darkened. Elara's legs gave out. She crumpled to the floor, a choked gasp escaping her lips. The pain was spreading, a fire racing through her veins, cold and hot at the same time. Her vision started to blur at the edges. Chaos erupted. Cassian was on his feet in an instant, a roar of pure fury tearing from his throat. But as he reached for Elara, he staggered, a hand flying to his own chest. He grunted in pain, his face contorting. The bond. Whatever was poisoning her was poisoning him through their link. "Silver nitrate," Serafina announced, her voice ringing out in the shocked silence. "Mixed with wolfsbane ash, a poison tailored for the royal line. It will burn through the human's veins, and through your bond, it will burn through yours, my king. A slow, agonizing death for you both." Valerius's allies drew their weapons, forming a protective circle around Serafina. "The king is weak," one of them shouted. "His human anchor is his undoing. A new era begins tonight." Cassian ignored them. He fell to his knees beside Elara, gathering her into his arms. Her body was already growing cold, her breathing shallow. Black veins were spreading from the point of the wound, like cracks in porcelain. "Elara," he said, his voice ragged with a desperation she had never heard before. He looked into her fading eyes, and the mask was gone. All of it. The coldness, the anger, the royal indifference. All that was left was a raw, terrifying agony, a fear that mirrored her own. He looked up, his gaze finding Serafina's through the throng of traitors. His voice was quiet, but it carried across the entire hall, filled with a terrible, broken clarity. "This throne, this empire," he said, his voice cracking, "all of it, it is ash without her." He looked back down at Elara, his hand stroking her hair. "You have won nothing," he whispered to his enemies, "because you have taken everything." The poison was a fire in his own blood now, weakening him, but he fought it. He had one last, desperate chance. A forbidden ritual, a myth whispered about in the oldest texts, a magic so dangerous no one had attempted it in millennia. The ritual of unification. It did not create a master and a servant. Created equals. It merged two souls, two life forces, into one. It was said to have the power to break any curse. But the cost was immense. A sacrifice of power, of immortality, of what made him a king. He didn't hesitate. Ignoring the shouts of his loyal guards as they clashed with the traitors, ignoring the spreading poison that was clouding his own vision, he lowered his head. He looked deep into Alara's eyes, trying to pour all of his strength, all of his will into her. "Stay with me," he commanded, his voice a plea. He lifted his own wrist to his mouth and, with his fangs, tore a deep gash in his own flesh. Dark, potent blood welled up. Then he gently took her hand, the one with the faint scar from the night they met, and he bit into her wrist, just enough to draw blood. He pressed their bleeding wounds together. Sanguis anima, sanguis regis. He began to chant, the words ancient and guttural, resonating with a power that made the very stones of the hall tremble.
Du facti sunt unum.
Anima in animum, blood of the soul, blood of the king. Two become one, soul to soul. A brilliant, blinding light erupted from their joined hands. It was not red or gold, but pure, white-hot energy. It engulfed them both, a cocoon of impossible power. Alara felt the cold fire of the poison recede, driven back by an overwhelming tide of warmth and strength. It was his life force, his ancient power, pouring into her, healing her, merging with her. She felt his pain, his fear, his centuries of loneliness, and a love so fierce and desperate it was breathtaking. And he felt hers, her fear, her defiance, her stubborn will to live. The light exploded outward. The wave of pure energy slammed into the battling vampires. To Cashin's loyal guards, it was a warm, fortifying wave. But to the traitors, to Seraphina and her allies, it was a searing, cleansing fire. Their stolen power, their malice, their treachery offered no defense. They screamed as the light burned them from the inside out, not killing them, but stripping them of their strength, leaving them weakened, mortal, pathetic husks. The light faded. Silence descended on the hall. Alara lay in Cashin's arms, breathing deeply and evenly. The black veins were gone. The color was returning to her cheeks. She opened her eyes. They were clear and bright. She felt whole, more than whole. She felt a strength she had never known, a deep, thrumming connection to the man who held her. She looked at him. He looked exhausted, drained, but the agony was gone from his face. His eyes, fixed on hers, were full of a profound, soul-deep relief, and a love that needed no words. The poison was gone. The curse of the fade, she could feel it in him, in their shared soul, had been shattered. Not just for him, but for all of them. The ritual hadn't just saved them. It had saved their entire race. She lifted a hand, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. He was no longer just the king. He was Cashin, and he was hers as she was his. Not by ownership, but by choice, by sacrifice. The new world began in the quiet that followed the storm. 6 months passed. The whispers of civil war had died, replaced by the stunned, hopeful murmurs of a world reborn. The traitors, led by a powerless and broken Seraphina, had been exiled, their weakness a more potent punishment than death. The old, rigid laws of the Vampire Council had crumbled under the weight of the new reality. The fade was gone. A quiet, collective sigh of relief had passed through their entire species. The slow decay that had haunted them for millennia had vanished, washed away in the light of the unification ritual. Alara stood on the balcony of the penthouse. The city lights spread out below her like a sea of fallen stars. The night air was cool on her skin. She was no longer a prisoner here. It was her home. She was no longer human, but she was not a vampire either. She was something new, a bridge between two worlds. She did not need to drink blood, but she felt the life force of the city around her, a vibrant, thrumming energy. She had the strength and speed of Cashin's kind, but her heart still beat with a steady, human rhythm. The glass doors slid open behind her. Cashin stepped out onto the balcony, his presence no longer a suffocating weight, but a familiar, comforting warmth. He came to stand beside her, his arm wrapping around her waist, pulling her close. "The reports from the Western Territories are good," he said, his voice a low murmur against her hair. "The lords have accepted the new laws. They are opening the first of the integrated clinics." "And the council?" she asked, leaning her head against his shoulder. "They are learning," he said, a hint of amusement in his tone. "Julius is an excellent, if somewhat stern, teacher of modern ethics." They were rebuilding their world from the ground up. The secrecy was being carefully, methodically dismantled, replaced by a slow, cautious integration with the human world they had hidden from for so long. Ilara's perspective, her humanity, was the cornerstone of their new society. She was not just a consort. She was a co-ruler. Her voice was heard in every council meeting, her ideas shaping the laws of their new era. She had found her power not in the uniqueness of her blood, but in the strength of her will and the compassion of her heart. He turned her to face him, his hands cupping her face. The look in his eyes held none of the old coldness. It was filled with a deep, unwavering adoration. The ritual had cost him a measure of his old, godlike power, grounding him, making him more mortal. But it had given him something infinitely more valuable in return. "I almost lost you," he whispered, the memory still a shadow in his eyes. "But you didn't," she replied softly, her hand covering his. "We saved each other." Their bond was no longer a supernatural chain of obligation, a king and his anchor. It was a connection of two equal souls, intertwined and unbreakable. It was a choice they remade every day, in every shared glance, every quiet conversation, every decision they made for the future of their people. He leaned down and kissed her, a kiss that was not about possession or power, but about partnership and a profound, quiet love that had been forged in fire and sacrifice. She looked out at the sprawling, sleeping city, at the endless possibilities of the future. Her life had been shattered by a clumsy mistake, a spilled glass of wine, but from those broken pieces they were building something new, something better. Fate hadn't chosen them for this path. They had chosen each other, and together, they would build a world where no one was powerless ever again.